everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Maya, and I'm an Autonomy College ambassador. Welcome to our first leadership lesson.
Hi, I also just wanted to second that. My name is Maggie, and I'm also an Autonomy College ambassador. And yeah, thank you all so much for coming.
If you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to pop them in the chat. We will have a question and answer period at the end, so you can also hold your questions until then and use the mic function. Without further ado, I would like to introduce today's guest speaker with us, Marissa, a registered holistic nutritionist from Joanne's Place. And today she's going to talk about the importance of food nutrition, and she's our first guest speaker for leadership lessons. So Marissa, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm looking forward to chatting a little bit more about building sustainable meals and for, your day-to-day life. So quickly, I just want to give a little introduction about myself. My name is Marissa Laughlin. I'm a holistic nutritionist as well as a functional lab practitioner. And I've been working alongside Joanne's Place for the last 8, almost 9 years to help support their wellness journeys. So I do believe that nutrition is one of the most important pillars of your health. A proper diet can really help you regain and rebuild your health, and it can be used also as a preventative treatment tool. Our bodies function best when we support it with good quality, nutrient-dense foods that provide energy and nourishment for all bodily functions. So during this presentation, we're going to be talking about the basics of nutrition while learning about how to eat balanced and sustainable meals that include all key macronutrients from good quality, nutrient-dense foods. So feel free to drop questions at any time through the chat as we go through, or as Maya said, we could talk about it at the end if you want to come off and use your mic option. So first, I want to just talk about what this means when you're building balanced meals. And this really does mean with all macronutrients. And I really want to put an emphasis on this because there is so much information out there that's pulling you in each direction saying, don't eat carbohydrates, don't eat these types of vegetables, don't eat different fats. And through my education, as well as through different clinical researches and studies and long-term studies on nutrient building and longevity, it's coming down to building meals that are sustainable for energy production and energy use, and that carry or consume all macronutrients. So that's proteins, carbs, healthy fats, and vegetables. This takes out the restriction part of certain food groups, and it really helps people thrive and really utilize their nutrition as a great energy source. So we're going to break down each of these macronutrients today: carbohydrates, healthy fats, and proteins, and talk a little bit more about how you can consume these and why they're important. So I want to start with carbohydrates because this is probably one of the most controversial topics I see in the health and wellness industry is carbohydrates, but there is a lot of misconceptions around carbohydrates, and that's what I would like to clarify today. So first of all, carbohydrates, what are they? They are organic molecules that are found in plant-based foods, and they are the body's preferred and primary source of energy, which makes them essential. And I really want to reiterate that. It's the primary source of energy. So every single thing that we do, thinking, moving, walking, studying, digesting food, all of that requires energy. And we typically get this energy from carbohydrates. So if we completely eliminate carbohydrates from our diets, all of those bodily functions can start to be slowed down. They might not be reaching its optimal function. Like, for an example, digestion. You might not be digesting food properly because we need carbohydrates to break down into glucose to use that for sugar and energy. If the item that we were talking about contains sugar, starch, or fiber, then it is considered a carbohydrate. Now, the role in the body, as I mentioned, carbohydrates are the main source of energy for bodily functions. Carbohydrates are also a structural component of cell membranes, and they also provide a source of fiber, which is really important for proper elimination. Some things to consider is that there's different types of carbohydrates, and that's what we're going to clarify today. And they all metabolize differently in the body, which means they metabolize at different rates. They break down, some slower, some faster, but also individually they burn down and break down different as well. So for instance, I might be somebody who burns carbohydrates very quickly, and I could experience food cravings, fatigue, and irritability within half an hour of consuming carbohydrates. Or other individuals could do the exact opposite, and they have this slow burning digestion of carbohydrates, and they feel more sustained for longer periods of time. Now, this in particular, as well as comparison in terms of burning carbohydrates faster versus slower, what also plays into this is other foods that you combine with carbohydrates, which we're going to get to in just a minute. So first, I want to talk about simple carbohydrates. This is the one of three types of carbohydrates. Simple carbohydrates are made up of monosaccharides, which means they are a single sugar molecule, or they're a disaccharide, meaning they have two. So one or two sugar molecules when it's broken down all the way down to glucose. And because there's only one or two sugar molecules, they are very quick to digest and also very quickly to be used for energy. But because they are broken down and utilized so quickly, we also burn through them very quickly because it's just one or two sugar molecules. So these types of carbohydrates are from glucose, fructose, galactose, which you would typically find in grapes, honey, fruit juices, and xylitol. And then also foods that contain maltose, sucrose, and lactose. So white sugar, cane sugar, maple syrup, molasses, milk products are just to name a few. The most important carbohydrate that I think is very critical for everybody to be consuming are complex carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates are made up of polysaccharides, meaning there's many sugar molecules present in these foods, but they also contain those starches and the fiber components as well. Because they contain more than one or two sugar molecules, they digest at a much slower rate, which allows for a more steady utilization of the glucose and glycogens that's produced, which means we'll have a better energy release. So these are the good carbohydrates that I really recommend people consume. And these, again, would contain a sugar, starch, and fiber, and typically come from whole unprocessed grains. So grains in their whole form. And this is where I want to really also put an emphasis on, like oats, quinoa, millet, rice, things like that. Those are in its whole state. What I wouldn't necessarily put in this category would be things like breads, pastas, things like that. Even if they're made with whole grains, they are processed in some form to be broken down into, the flours and maybe a more grittier type of texture rather than in its whole form. So when I'm saying complex carbohydrates, we are talking about the ingredient in its whole form, not modified in any way. Also, foods that are rich in fiber, like fruits and vegetables, beans and legumes, chickpeas, lentils, and also nutrient-dense seeds and nuts, which would be like almonds, peanuts, chia seeds, flax. All of these in their whole form are also considered complex carbohydrates. So these are the good guys. These are the ones that we want to consume on a regular basis, and these are the ones that we should be relying on for energy support. Refined carbs. These are more of the carbs that are giving carbohydrates more of the bad name and why people might be trying to remove carbohydrates from their diets. These are also the types of carbohydrates that lead people to type 2 diabetes because of how processed they are, the amount of sugar that's in them. So these are really the ones where we're seeing people linking to obesity or to type 2 diabetes, which is a lifestyle factor based diabetes. And these are more the ones that we want to either avoid or just limit our intake of. And these are considered the refined carbohydrates because they remove the germ and the husk from the grain. So because of removing those fibrous sources that we would find in these grains, it causes digestion to speed up into glucose, followed by a blood sugar spike. So we digest these really quickly, but they're not in a preferred form of energy source. Yes, it converts to glucose, but our body is like, whoa, what is this? It's not from a milk product. It's not from like a sugar, which we talked about, and it's causing quite a big blood sugar spike because there's lots of single mono or disaccharides in these types of refined carbohydrates. So it just is a lot of sugar that's released in the bloodstream at one time. Also, these types of foods tend to have other additives that can really interfere and inhibit with digestion function, as well as the uptake of nutrients from different foods. And these types of additives could be preservatives, gums, and thickeners. So overconsumption, and I want to say, really stress overconsumptions. This isn't having these types of foods like occasionally. It's like relying on these types of food as your main primary intake at each meal. So overconsumption of refined carbohydrates are really the ones to blame for this misinformation about consumption of carbohydrates being bad for our health. If you choose the right carbohydrates in the right quantity, they are essential, especially because they are our main source of energy. So types of refined carbohydrates would be the cookies and the breads and the muffins, cake, donuts, and anything that would be packaged foods. So these foods should be consumed in moderation. And I really want to stress that in moderation, if it aligns with your wellness journey, because if it's something that's going to cause you distress in terms of your digestive function, or it's something that's going to impact you in a way that's making you feel very sluggish after consuming, then I don't think that these would be worth consuming on your wellness journey. It's just maybe being mindful of how your body reacts in response to these foods. But regardless, I wouldn't be consuming them on a daily basis. Next up, I want to talk about protein. So protein is one of the most important macronutrients. Amino acids are the structural components of protein, and they're the building blocks for structures in the body. So collagen, connective tissue, all of our muscles, hair, skin, nails. In order for anything to grow and sustain its form, it will require the amino acids that we find in protein. Protein is also really important for regulating body processes such as hormone and enzyme production. And adequate levels of protein is also important to help with blood sugar balance, manage weight, and keeping you full and satiated longer. There is a lot of information out there about if you are consuming carbohydrates, that consuming with a protein can lessen the reaction in terms of digestion into glucose and that spike in the blood sugar. It really slows that digestion process down. So protein is just very important, and it should be used or consumed, we'll say, at every single meal. Let's talk about types of protein. So we have the obvious ones, animal sources, and this is also a controversial topic because the industry, the wellness industry and health industry, we've seen vegan and vegetarian-based diets really increase over the years. But from a educational and professional standpoint, animal source protein will always be the better protein in terms of quality and the amount of vitamins and minerals you're getting and the density of it, because animal source proteins are complete proteins. They consume all of those amino acids, which are required for the building blocks, and it is a complete protein in and of itself. So you don't have to pair it with anything to get all of the benefits from it. So that's your meats, your fish, your dairy, your eggs. Ideally, as a nutritionist, I'll always recommend organic, pasture-raised, grass-fed and wild caught for the benefit of reducing your exposure to hormones, but also because this might be biased because I'm in the health and wellness industry, but I see a future where I hope for a future that we will eventually not have conventionally raised factory farm meat available, because it is inhumane. It is not a way in which we should consume meat. But in order for us to get that transition away from factory farm meat, we need to be able to spend our dollars in the industry that's helping to prevent that from happening. So regenerative farming, grass-fed farming, pasture-raised, organic, ones that are humanely raising their animals. This is where we see a more sustainable future for having animal source proteins. And that's where the conversation of people having plant-based as like vegetarian, vegan is more sustainable and environmentally friendly. Compared to conventional farming, yes, but it is not compared to organic, pasture-raised, grass-fed farming and regenerative farming. We need to be able to have a full circle of life with animals. So obviously we need crops to grow from waste from animals, and we need that full circle. But if we get rid of all types of animal-based protein, we're not going to have that regenerative farming and organic and pasture-raised and things like that. Sorry, that's another conversation for another time, but there's a lot of misconception around animal source protein, and it really comes down to the quality that makes the biggest impact. So chicken, beef, pork, bison, wild game, turkey, eggs, dairy, salmon, tuna, herring, all those types of wild caught fish and seafood would be great options. So try to avoid farm raised fish and conventionally farmed meat when possible. Types of protein. On the other end of that would be the plant-based sources. Now, obviously, this category is really being pushed for plant-based alternatives. But there's a few things that we need to know. We need to understand that plant-based protein sources like beans, legumes, nuts, seed, grains, soy, tofu, they are not complete proteins. So there does require more research to be done as an individual on how much of each ingredient you would need to make up a complete protein. And this is important because you need all of the amino acids that you would find in protein for the proper building blocks in the body. Otherwise, you will run into nutritional deficiencies. And it's very common in vegan and vegetarian based diets to have, low B12, low iron. And a lot of that does come down to the protein sources of not having the correct nutrients involved. So it's not impossible by any means. And I'm not against plant-based approaches to food, but we just need to make sure that you're consuming enough of that to get the full benefit. And then obviously keeping in mind that these protein sources come with other macronutrients. So like beans and grains and things, they also have a higher complex carbohydrate component as well, which we don't want to overdo because that can also make us lethargic. It's also really important to note that choosing organic and non-GMO for these types of proteins is really important, because when we do not choose organic and non-GMO for grains and legumes, we are running into mass-produced grains sprayed with chemicals like glyphosates. I'm not going to go in a big rant about glyphosates because we don't have enough time, but I would do a little research on glyphosates and what that has as an impact long-term on your health and your hormones. And then the other thing I really want to stress is to really avoid the imitation meats, Gardein, Tofurkey, Beyond Meat Burger, those types of things. I will never recommend those as a protein source because of the other additives that are put into those products. They are heavily processed, and those to be considered the refined carbohydrates as well, is they are of that manufactured fake food, we can say. So using beans, lentils, things like that as your protein source, amazing in their whole form, not necessarily in their, imitation style meat, we'll say. Okay. Next up, let's talk about healthy fats. So fats are another really important macronutrient. They're an essential component of a healthy diet, and there's lots of different roles it has. Very similar to carbohydrates, they're a great source of energy for the body. They're not the primary preferred source, but fats can be used as a source of energy. Fats are also the driving metabolic processes that are happening in the body. So hormones, vitamin D levels, you can't sustain those levels or reach optimal levels without healthy fats. Healthy fats are also a component of cells and cell membranes. They cover the nerves, they insulate internal organs. They're also a waterproof for the skin. They transport vitamins such as A, D, E, and K. They increase the absorption of calcium, magnesium. They help you feel fuller longer and prolong digestion. And fats, especially paired with carbohydrates, can really slow the release of sugar into the bloodstream. Now, it's important to consider that not all fats are good fats. So let's get into those details. The two main types of fats that I would recommend are saturated fats and unsaturated fats, but there's some controversy around saturated fats because these are what some people would consider the not so healthy fats, and specific types of doctors would lead you to believe that saturated fats are the reason of why you have fatty liver or high cholesterol or trouble digesting fats, is these ones that are typically blamed. But I'm going to talk about the ones that are actually causing more of a problem when you're consuming it. Now, butter, meat fat, egg yolks, cocoa butter, coconut, things like that. These are okay in moderation. I want to say these aren't necessarily things that I recommend because they are a form of fat still. They still will have an impact on all of those things I said, but they're not the leading cause of cardiovascular disease or cholesterol and things like that. There's a lot of lifestyle factors that come into that as well, and hereditary factors. But these fats aren't ones that you should forever remove. They just might be ones you maybe consume occasionally, maybe a couple times a week. Okay. Unsaturated fats, these are the best types of fats. These are considered the healthiest fats. These are the ones that we see in the Mediterranean diet that really help with glowing skin, that help reduce inflammation, that help with skin irritations, that give the body energy. These are the best types of fats. So these would be olives in their whole or oil form, avocados in their whole or oil form, nuts and seeds, whole milk ingredients. So these would be like unhomogenized raw milk, or like a 3.8% more a fattier type of milk, whole milk ingredients. Also same for like yogurt, the higher percentage is going to give you more of that saturated fats. Egg yolks, this is also on both saturated fats and unsaturated fats, but I would say the average person would consume, 1 to 2, 3 maybe a day of egg yolks. We'd be running into some problems when we have people consuming, 12 a day. That would be more what we were concerned about. And then also fish. Fish is a great source of unsaturated fats as well. So the fats that I recommend that you avoid: artificial trans fats. So trans fats are created when you take a hydrogenated oil and you make it into a solid type of food that is typically shelf stable, or can be still at a solid form when it's out in, say, a room temperature home. So an example would be margarine, microwavable popcorn, that type of texture on the outside of it when it pops up. Fried food, processed foods. These are the problematic foods because they are the foods aren't maybe artificially created, but the types of trans fats that are used in these foods are. So hydrogenated oils, what are they? These are when they take these are highly processed, and they take some type of oil and they try to make it become shelf stable to extend the shelf life. These tend to be higher on omega-6s, which can be more inflammatory for certain body types. But there's the problem here with these types of foods is they use a lot of different ingredients during manufacturing processes that can be very problematic. So these hydrogenated oils would be like canola oil, soybean oil, corn oil. And my biggest tip for hydrogenated oils would be asking yourself, if you consumed the food in its whole form, would it be oily? So think about corn, for instance. When you bite into corn, there's not really any oil that's produced. Maybe you're putting butter on top of that, but there's not necessarily any oil that's coming from that. Whereas like an olive, for instance, you could squeeze an olive out and you would get oil from that. Same with a soybean. If you've ever seen a soybean, it's very hard. It's like an actual bean. So to squeeze that and get oil from that, they have to do a lot of extraction, a lot of chemicals, and a high processed heat to make that happen. Also fat-free. I think we're past the days of fat-free, but fat-free foods have been falsely marketed to us as more beneficial for cardiovascular health. These are the same people that are saying cardiovascular disease is driven by saturated fats. However, there has been a lot of studies that this has been disproven. And something that's labeled fat-free is not necessarily the best option because it's very highly processed to remove all of the fat that it went to, so during that manufacturing process, they've extracted the fat and removed it from it. So during this process, same thing for the hydrogenated oils, solvents, chemicals, lots of different additives are used, which I would recommend looking a little bit into because there's some long-term effects of some of these solvents that we're seeing pop up in these types of manufacturing. Adequate nutrition. So let's talk about how much of a nutrient intake is essential per day. So I put a few extra pieces of information on here that we may not have covered today, but this is a really great, image to screenshot or come back to as a base level to consider in terms of daily intake. This will vary depending on, your body type, your activity level. Maybe you're athletic and you're requiring more calorie intake. Maybe you have more of a sedentary job, which will require less food for consumption in terms of not necessarily needing more of the energy component from food. But just something to consider. I recommend 3 to 4 servings of 4 ounces of protein. So whether you choose to do plant-based or meat-based protein per meal. We've got 2 to 3 servings of either 0.5 to 1 cup of serving per carbohydrate. If we're looking more at grains and beans and things like that, I would be leaning more towards the half cup. If you're looking more towards like sweet potatoes and things like that, thank you so much for coming, for your type of carbohydrate source, you may be looking more at a cup. Healthy fats, we've got about 3 to 4 servings of 1 to 2 tablespoons per serving. On the other side, we've got vegetables. This, we may not have like touched specifically on vegetables today, but this would be considered also a carbohydrate source, but also high in antioxidants, so many vitamins and minerals coming from that. And I recommend every single meal should have some type of vegetable present, and within a day aiming for 5 to 7 cups. If you can't necessarily at 5 to 7 cups, what I would suggest is just keeping your choices of vegetables diverse. So every couple days, like maybe you have 1 to 2 servings of vegetables per meal. And then every couple of days, just changing up what your vegetable sources are. So instead of spinach one week, doing, mixed greens another, just keeping that diversity if you're not hitting the main 5 to 7 cups per day. Also, fruit. If you're somebody who just can't get over having vegetables for breakfast, you could use fruit as your optimal serving for produce of antioxidants, some fiber, carbohydrate source, also in the morning. So if you're having, some eggs or something, pairing that with your fruit to cover kind of that fresh piece that the vegetables would have. Water, 2 to 3. This is just an optimal range. Some people will require more, some people will require less. Caffeine, I like to say 1 to 2 cups, no more than that. And then sugar, trying to have 30 grams or less, which can be quite challenging, but just something to be mindful of on how much sugar intake you're having, because that has an impact on your metabolism, on your energy levels and things like that as well. And then one more thing I wanted to just quickly say is how to decide whether or not your intake is good for you. And there's 3 things I always recommend that you should be paying attention to, and sensations after eating a meal, and asking yourself if it's good. First, feeling satiated. Are you feeling satiated between meals with no cravings? Are you having good energy after consuming a meal? Are your energy levels sustained during the next 3 hours after a meal? Or are you feeling very fatigued and that slump after? That could indicate that it may be not balanced, and it might be too either carbohydrate heavy or too fat heavy, or maybe just not enough protein. And then lastly, a sense of well-being. Are you feeling happy and content with your meal choice, or are you feeling irritated and hangry? And I like to use the analogy that if you're consuming what you think is a healthy meal every single day, so we'll use salad as an example, but you eat the salad and you're just very irritated, you hated it, you didn't think it tasted good, and you're not feeling good, that will have more of a negative impact than if you would have had, say, like a stir fry or having something else like a burger, where you felt really happy and content and full after. So making sure that you're feeling really good after consuming food has a major impact on your diet and your well-being as well. One more thing actually was snacking. I get this question a lot, and it kind of ties into being able to sustain your energy after consuming a meal. Is snacking good or bad? If a snack is a macronutrient balanced or dense food or meal, we'll say, then it's totally okay. But it's not recommended to snack if it's for a sugar hit or if it's out of boredom. That's a whole other conversation on its own. But as the need for snacking might be, if you feel like you need it, it might be because your main meals are lacking nutrients. So first, really focus on balancing those main meals and having protein, fat, and carbohydrates. If you do need to snack, having trail mix, almond butter with apples and cinnamon, hard-boiled eggs with veggies, or a protein shake would be a great option. But usually when we're snacking, we're always reaching for more of those convenient foods. So trying to stay clear of those to keep your energy levels up would be best. Any questions from anybody that's still on the call? You're welcome to come off mute.
A few people had to go for class.
It's totally okay. No problem.
Fine.
Okay.
I have a few questions prepared if you want. So I just wanted to ask, what does your work mean to you? Like, you also meet with individuals, or they book consultations with you? How does that make you feel? Sort of the job aspect.
Yeah, of course. I love this question. I absolutely love what I do. And I will say very quickly, before I became a nutritionist, my decision to actually enroll, I went to the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition, which is a private school in Toronto. They're across Canada, but they specialize in nutrition, health, and wellness studies. But when I actually had gone to school originally, it was for my own health and my own health concerns because I wasn't getting the answers I needed. And around that time, I was diagnosed with celiac disease. So I just needed help. And I wanted to, my mom and me decided we're just going to take my health into my own hands. So I went to school and I loved it. And then when I got out of school, I got a job at Joanne's Place. And then I realized how much this industry can make an impact on people's lives. So I absolutely love my job. I love helping people. I love talking about all things health and wellness. I love following trends, researching trends. I also, for everyone listening, Joanne's Place has a podcast. It's called the Wellness on Purpose podcast. And I help them host that. And we talk to different brands and we talk to different people in our community about what wellness means to them and different wellness conversations. And anyways, bottom line is my job is incredibly fulfilling. And I love being able to connect with this generation of people as well, because you guys are kind of shaping the future of what health and wellness is going to look like and how this industry is going to go. And I think more and more people are really trying to prioritize their health and make decisions for themselves, which is amazing.
Thank you very much. That was very well put and answered a few of the other questions I had. So like as this presentation is kind of like this event is for students, do you have any suggestions on how the student working on with a student budget, how you would buy these foods to achieve this kind of nutrition?
Absolutely.
Like right now, like I usually use a lot of I'm like, what's in the flyer? What are we eating this week? But any of your suggestions would be lovely.
Yes. I have a few suggestions. Definitely flyer. I know myself, I use the Flip app and I find it really helpful for kind of circling and creating your list exactly in that app. And I'm the same. I know I'm maybe not a student, but I think budgeting is really important no matter what age you're at, especially with the rise in food costs. But that'd be my first recommendation. My second recommendation is to be really intentional with the foods that you're buying and repurposing those ingredients. So rather than buying things like, 6 different vegetables or like 6 different fruits, I really would say every week, focus on 3 fruits, 3 vegetables, and choosing ones that keep their freshness a little bit longer. So for an example, like spinach per se, that keeps a little bit longer than some romaine lettuce. So that might be an easy one. Plus it's really great if you need to freeze it. Sweet potatoes, they last a little bit longer. So things that could, withstand another week. And then also choosing frozen options. That's another thing that we always think we need to get fresh of everything. Frozen is just as good if you have the freezer space available. And you're still getting the nutritional benefit than you would from fresh, and you're just able to preserve that a little bit longer. And my last tip that I think is a really great option is getting a group of friends that are on the same page as you, that you could either swap food with. So say you're making a pot of chili per se, that's going to give you an X amount of ingredients. And then somebody else is making a soup and somebody else is making, I don't know, like maybe some type of baked lasagna. So you guys can just switch up the food and not feeling like you're over consuming or just getting sick of that food that you've prepped that week. So that'd be my third tip, is just get a little group of people that you can exchange some of those meals with and that you're kind of all on the same page in terms of nutrition on.
That's a really fun meal prep swap idea, because some people they make a big thing of chili and then they have to eat it all week and they get bored of it. So that's a really good idea. I also like that you mentioned a little bit regarding food waste. So if you get those vegetables and instead of even scraps, instead of throwing the scraps out, you can make vegetable broth or a soup base for the broccoli stems. Repurposing them, having good intentions like you mentioned is just a good thing to keep in mind. Let's see. I'm still looking for one more question, I think, probably to round us out. And we might end a little bit early. You mentioned. Maybe we'll go back to what achievement are you most? This could be in personal or professional aspects, community aspects.
Sorry, did you say it was a question? What I couldn't hear it. Sorry, it cut out.
Okay. What achievement are you most proud of?
Okay.
Personal, professional. Yeah.
That's a great question. That's a really great question. There's so many. I think something that I'm really proud of, I have so many answers. I'm really proud of my decision to work with Joanne's Place, not even to make that sound cliche at all, but Joanne's Place is a local health food store that we've been here for over 45 years. And it is very challenging. I'm also a business owner outside of Joanne's Place. So it's as a business owner, it's very challenging to do all of the things and to withstand an industry for 45 years, especially in Peterborough is still quite small. It is, challenging to do. So I'm proud on behalf of Joanne's Place to be in this space of Peterborough and providing support to our community for the last 45 years and continuously growing. We have some really incredible projects coming up this year. We're launching an online program. Our podcast is growing rapidly, which is amazing. And again, if you're listening to this and you're a podcast junkie, definitely check us out because there's a lot of really useful information. We release every other week, sometimes every third week. It's called the Wellness on Purpose podcast. You'll find that on our website or Spotify, Apple Podcasts. So I'm just really proud of the achievement of being in this space of Peterborough and partnering with people like Trent to keep growing and just to be there when anyone else needs us. So we have an incredible team. If you have questions, we have also in a shopping experience that I'm not trying to be biased is none other than Joanne's Place because we have a variety of things, your supplements, your dried goods, your refrigerated, your fresh produce, your cosmetics. We kind of cover each area of your health journey. And we really pride ourselves on picking the best products for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I know we have the 67 sips now on Joanne's Place and smoothies are very good. It's a very nice little place. So I think that's all for today. I'd like to thank everyone again for coming. Marissa, if you just want to stay back for a little bit, and thank you so much for those students who joined us today.
Thank you, everybody. And just to let you know, we have 2 locations in Peterborough. If you're wondering where you can find us, so Joanne's Place, there's one on Water Street, just down from Trent. And there's also one in the west end of Peterborough on Lansdowne. And then, as you mentioned, 76 Sips is a cafe that we have also created under Joanne's Place. There's one in Trent, and there's also one in our Lansdowne location as well.